Here is the punch that stings before it heals. Price does not climb because a chalkboard curve politely shifts. Price rips because real buyers slam the tape while shorts cough up shares in panic. The original lines dress it up, clean demand up. Price up. Supply up. Price down. Cute. Comfortable. Also, the exact lullaby that keeps you sedated while the market raids your stops. You nod along because it feels scientific. Like the old diagram where two lines kiss in the middle and everyone goes home. No worries. Right? Except this is not a classroom. This is a pit where every tick is printed by a market order that ate a limit. And by a stop that became a market order the second your conviction broke. You can worship curves. The tape only pays attention to pressure. Let us strip the content to its bones. The strongest point you offered lands true. Price climbs not only because of active buying from the crowd, but also because short sellers who declared too high get forced to buy back. That admission burns. And it should. It means half of the so-called rally is not belief. It is surrender. It is not value discovered. It is pain discovered. You built a neat story of supply and demand, and then you quietly confess that demand includes the very people who bet against the move. Forced demand is still demand. The tape does not ask whether the buy was voluntary or humiliating. It just moves. That is the bitter core you touched. And I am not letting you look away. Here is where the blind spot hides. When you say, when demand increases, price increases, you skip the mechanics that make that real. Demand is not a pretty curve shifting to the right. Demand is a sequence of aggressive orders crossing the spread, chewing through resting offers, and creating a vacuum above. Supply is not a curve sliding left. Supply is an inventory of resting asks that either absorb the hit or pull away. When those asks pull, your chart does not see more supply. It sees less resistance. And when shorts are wrong, their stops are cued buys. They are gasoline, not water. So every time you say price is too high, remember the tape hears there is a cluster of potential buy orders above. You can call it value. The tape calls it fuel. The content also slips on another banana peel. It treats too high like analysis, when it is usually ego in a lab coat. If price is too high, who exactly decreed that? The textbook curve? The armchair metric that makes you feel clever? You are not measuring value. You are announcing where your patience runs out. And where your patience runs out. Your stop sits. And where your stop sits. The market knows there is liquidity. Your opinion is the billboard for your liquidation. You do not have to like that. The tape does not care whether you like it. It just waits to see if you will cut your losses hard or if you will get wrecked on a pump and dump while muttering that the curve said it could not go higher. No worries. The curve will not visit you in the drawdown. You did nail the dual-engine crowd, buying plus short covering. But you left out the reflexive loop that makes those engines scream. Fresh buyers push price. Shorts puke. The puke becomes more price. Late shorts pile in to fade the insanity. The new shorts get torched. Their pain becomes more demand. And now, the crowd reads strength where there was only surrender. That cycle is not a theory of everything. It is just a ruthless reminder that flows beat stories. Your content poked the truth and then pulled back, as if naming short stops was enough. It is not enough. It matters how stops cluster, how they cascade, how gaps in liquidity turn a grind into a rip. When you say, price rises because demand increased, you blur the difference between chosen demand and weaponized demand. One is conviction. The other is capitulation. The tape treats them the same. Your equity curve does not. So, let me echo your point with the volume turned up. The market does not move on fairness. It moves on forced action. Every too high that refuses to die becomes a buy order waiting to happen. Every neat curve is a comfort blanket thrown over a live wire. If price is printed by crowd buys and short pain, what does that make your next overbought call analysis? Or an invitation for the tape to use your exit as its next step? And if the tape eats exits for breakfast, what does that say about the way you frame supply and demand when the real engine is a pile of stops crouching above your pride? You already felt the sting. Price prints because real buys cross the spread and short stops detonate into forced bids. Now push that logic to its ugly edge. If a rally is partly conviction and partly capitulation, then every time you label price as too high, you are drawing a map to your own future buy order. That is not poetry. That is the plumbing. Your sentence about shorts getting cut because they think price is too high translates to a queue of buy orders stacked exactly where their pride ends. The market does not need to inspire new believers when it can harvest old doubters. No worries. Right? Keep calling it overbought while your stop pre-commits to being the next customer at the ask. Your framework drifts because it keeps talking in curves instead of orders. Demand increases sounds tidy until you ground it. Demand is not a feeling. Demand is aggressive. Orders marching upward. Smashing through offers. Converting what used to be supply into a memory. And supply increases is only meaningful if those offers actually stay put and absorb. In the real tape, supposed supply often vanishes. The instant it is tested, sellers pull. The book thins. One more tick. Two more ticks. And suddenly, your so-called increase in supply looks like a hole. Price does not climb because a chalk sketch moved. It climbs because your resting story got pulled while real orders hit. You can dress that up as elasticity if that helps you sleep. The tape will still show a vacuum above and a ladder of stops ready to feed it. The original content's strongest clause admits that shorts being forced to buy is a non-trivial part of the move. That clause cuts deeper than you let it. Forced buying is not a sideshow. It is often the structural backbone of a run. The psychology is baked into the mechanics. Shorts who declared too high do not capitulate all at once. They capitulate in bands. One band trips. The next band flinches. And the band above that pretends to be brave until the heat reaches their line. Each band is a slab of pending demand, waiting to convert. And each conversion pulls the next. You did not just describe demand. You described a staircase of humiliation that doubles as a price ladder. That is why a grind can turn into a rip with zero warning, not because demand surged in some mystical sense, but because the next slab of stops was closer than your model cared to admit. There is another blind fold in the text, the silent assumption that supply is static. When supply increases, price falls. Under what conditions? If those new offers are large, visible, and firm, sure, the move stalls. But the second those offers flinch, your premise dissolves. A wall that steps back is not supply. It is bait. And once the wall retreats, the perceived increase in supply becomes an increase in trapped shorts who leaned on that wall. The consequence is mechanical. They add, it fails. They add again to get a better average. Then the market does what the market does. It converts their averaging into scale in demand on the way up. You called it a ceiling. It was a springboard. How many times does that have to happen before the textbook graph stops being your alibi? Strip the romance. Too high is not a valuation. It is a threshold where your willingness to suffer ends. That threshold is tradable because it is public in spirit, even if private in numbers. The more popular the idea that price is stretched, the larger the band of synchronized stops. Crowded disbelief becomes synchronized demand. The result is reflexive. Rising price creates covering. Covering pushes price. Pushed price recruits fresh disbelief. Disbelief lays more stops. Stops become bids. Bids print higher. Higher prints are reinterpreted as proof of exhaustion, which quietly seeds the next layer of fuel. You are not watching supply and demand shift. You are watching the market engineer demand from denial. The cruelty here is simple. Your sentence meant to balance the narrative crowd buys plus shortcuts, yet it exposes why so many get wrecked on a pump and dump while swearing they respected supply and demand. Respecting a diagram is not the same as respecting order flow. If you keep thinking in curves, you will keep handing the tape your exit as an entry. And if the tape happily recycles exits into entries, what exactly do you think your next too high label is announcing insight? Or inventory? You already admitted the skeleton. Price is printed by crowd buys and by shorts forced to buy back. Good. Now let us expose the organs you did not name, the systemic mistakes wired into that simple statement that keep you donating liquidity with a smile. First, the content treats demand like a single animal. It is not. Crowd buys include chasers, adders, profit takers flipping into fresh risk, and late converts who hate being wrong more than they hate being poor. Lumping them into a curve lets you ignore the cadence. The tape does not care about your average notion of demand. It cares about the next order, the next pocket of air, the next bracket of stops. When you say demand increased, you blur out the path. Path dependence is the killer. Price rising through a vacuum on thin offers is not the same as price rising into a thick wall that absorbs and flips you. One path begets cascading stops. The other invites fade attempts that may actually stick. Your curve model erases the path, and the path is where you bleed. Second, you sneak in the idea that shorts are a homogeneous block that gets cut. That phrasing sounds tidy, like a one-time event. In the real sequence, shorts capitulate in layers tied to their entry logic, their risk thresholds, and their ego stamina. Each layer is a shelf of resting stops. Each shelf turns to market buys at a different heat level. That is why rallies often move in brutal steps rather than smooth gradients. You are not watching continuous demand. You are watching discrete detonations of forced bids. Your sentence gestures at forced buying, but misses the stepwise design. Miss the steps, and you keep shorting into the next shelf like a daredevil who thinks courage is a strategy. No worries. The next shelf is already named after you. Third, the content equates supply increases with price falling as if visibility equals execution. It does not. A book full of offers that pull the instant they are tested is not supply. It is theater. If those offers retreat, your premise collapses in real time and becomes a launch pad for the very squeeze you just declared impossible. Worse, when that theatrical wall lures shorts. Their entries lay down fresh stop fuel above. You thought you saw an increase in supply. You actually seeded an increase in forced demand. The tape thanks you for your service and invoices you in slippage. Fourth, there is a dangerous silence around passive versus active liquidity. Your lines talk like all orders are equal. They are not. Passive supply sits and lets price come to it. Active supply crosses the spread and slams the bid. The difference is the whole ballgame. If sellers refuse to act and only pretend to supply by advertising size that never fills, buyers only need modest aggression to climb. Meanwhile, every short who leaned on the advertised wall is now carrying a time bomb labeled stop. Your content half opens that door by mentioning shortcuts, then shuts it before the draft hits your face. Leave it open. Feel the draft. That is the flow you keep ignoring. Fifth, the time dimension is missing. Your statement reads like static truth, but liquidity regimes shift by hour. by session, by catalyst, by who is trapped. A demand increase at a dead liquidity hour can do more damage than a larger demand increase during a liquid session because the book is thinner, the holes are wider, and the stop shelves are closer. Call it micro. Call it mechanics. Call it the plumbing you do not want to learn. The market calls it the only thing that matters when your neat theory collides with a live ladder. Finally, the phrase "price is too high" remains the glittering lie that ties it all together. You wear it like wisdom. It is just a confession about your tolerance. And the tape weaponizes confessions. Every trader who shares your "too high" label contributes to a synchronized cluster of stops. That cluster is a pre-written buying program waiting for a spark. You think you are spotting overextension. You are actually mapping a runway. If your definition of supply and demand cannot tell you when advertised supply will flinch, when passive offers will vanish, when the shelf of stops will flip the ladder, what exactly are you trading, ideas or orders? Naive theory loves clean binaries. Your content starts with that comfort blanket. When the demand line rises, price rises. When the supply line rises, price falls. Reality does not salute that. Reality brawls in microseconds and humiliates anyone speaking in chalk. On paper, curves shift with dignity. On the tape, the so-called supply line blinks, pulls, flickers, and sometimes never shows. On paper, demand is a swell of rational interest. On the tape, demand is a sequence of impatient punches across the spread, mixed with a chain of forced buys, detonating at pre-agreed pain levels. You offered the classroom. The market offers a confession booth. One version flatters belief. The other cashes checks with other people's panic. Take your sentence about shorts calling price too high. In the naive picture, that is smart skepticism, standing guard over value. In the harsh picture, that is a parade of time bombs taped under the ladder. The naive picture says skeptics add supply and cool the heat. The harsh picture says skeptics create synchronized demand. The second, their pride taps out. The naive picture sees balance as a polite negotiation. The harsh picture watches a captive audience, bidding against itself while pretending to be in control. Funny, right? Not to your balance. The tape does not care whether the buy was bold or shameful. Green is green. Naive thinking treats supply as a wall and demand as a wave. Harsh reality exposes how quickly the wall learns to backpedal. Advertised size can vanish. Resting asks can step away. The book thins. The vacuum widens. And suddenly the increase in supply that the diagram promised becomes a trampoline for the exact squeeze your sentence casually acknowledged. Naive you says, "See, more supply arrived." Harsh tape says, "It arrived," smiled for the camera, then left you holding a short with a stop hanging like a ripe fruit. No worries, dude. The fruit gets picked whether or not you believe in orchards. Naive thinking says demand is wholesome conviction. Harsh reality says half the demand is a funeral march for bad bets. You hinted at that, then softened the edges as if forced buying were a polite footnote. It is not a footnote. It is the escalator hidden under the carpet. The steps engage in bands. Each band converts disbelief into bids. Each conversion looks like strength to onlookers, who then join late and swear they are disciplined. The curve model ignores that feedback loop. The tape lives on it. Miss the loop and you keep labeling the run irrational while becoming part of its fuel. Get wrecked. Then write a thread about manipulation. Classic. Naive thinking assumes time does not matter. Harsh reality is time-sliced. Liquidity is a living animal that changes by session, catalyst, and who is trapped. A small nudge during a thin regime explodes more than a large shove during a thick one. Your lines never admit that timing alters truth. The graph pretends continuity. The tape delivers cliffs. When cliffs appear, price does not respect your curve. It respects the absence of stairs. That is when the too high chorus layers it stops neatly, as if doing the tape a favor. The tape says thank you and ticks. Naive thinking treats buyers and sellers like teams in matching uniforms. Harsh reality splits them by behavior, passive versus active, patient versus panicked, staged versus sprayed. Your content collapses that into a single demand line and a single supply line. That collapse is where money goes to die. Passive supply that stands and absorbs is a break. Passive supply that blinks is lighter fluid. Active supply that slams bids can arrest a move. Active supply that refuses to engage is just an opinion posted on a wall no one reads. You sketched a universe where intentions equal outcomes. The market lives in a universe where only executed aggression counts. Naive thinking thinks value calls the shots. Harsh reality watches inventory, call the ambulance. Too high sounds principled. In practice, it telegraphs where conviction expires. The crowd shares that principle, then shares that exit. Congratulations, you built a choir, and every voice in that choir is a pending buy order above the last high. The moment the latter leans their way, harmony turns into fireworks. The graph claims that supply increased. The tape says the only thing that increased was the number of confession letters sitting above the range. Naive thinking loves linear cause and effect. Demand rises. Price rises. Supply rises. Price falls. Harsh reality is reflexive. Rising price creates covering. Covering creates more rising. More rising creates disbelief. Disbelief lays the stops. Stops create the next wave. Your original line briefly touched that reflex when it cited shortcuts, then retreated to the safety of curbs. That retreat is the whole tell. If the engine is reflex, then the diagram is a bedtime story you tell yourself to make volatility sound polite. Polite does not pay. Pressure pays. And if pressure pays, does the curve model explain anything about how your next too high becomes the next forced bid? Or does it just wrap your pain in academic ribbon? So, here is the split screen you keep dodging. On the left, a world where supply and demand are smooth, honest, and visible. On the right, a world where supply lies, demand hides, and stops sing louder than opinions. Only one of those worlds prints your P and L. If the content you started with was meant to clarify why price moves, why does its clean logic keep breaking exactly where your balance breaks at the moment intention turns into forced action? And if the break happens there, what kind of lens would stop you from mistaking a ceiling for a springboard again? You want an exit out of that chalk maze? There is one. But it looks nothing like the tidy graph you started with. Take your own line. Price rises on crowd buying and on shorts getting cut, and tilted until the classroom glare dies. Through that angle, demand is not a curve. It is executed aggression. Supply is not a curve. It is either absorption that stands and takes the hit, or an advertisement that blinks and runs. Too high is not valuation. It is a timer on a forced bid. Once that translation lands, the picture gets usable. The focus stops drifting toward theories and snaps to pressure. Who acts next? Who acts fast? And who acts without a choice? The parts of your content that had bite crowd buys, stop-driven demand, become a working map. Once you stop pretending the tape owes you a negotiation, look at the sentence about shorts thinking price is too high and getting cut. In the graph world, that is a footnote. In a pressure map, that is the compass. Crowd buying is visible. Forced buying is predictable. not predictable like a fortune cookie. Predictable like gravity. Pain reaches a known threshold and converts disbelief into bids. A lens built around that does not worship levels as truth. It treats them as shelves, where humiliation will convert into demand. That is not romantic. It is cold. It also fits what you already wrote, better than the curved story you tried to keep alive. Another translation helps. Demand increased becomes aggressive. Buyers kept crossing the spread while supposed supply refused to absorb. Supply increased becomes offers stood and actually filled. Or they vanished and turned into bait. That wording is rude. Sure. But it stops lying. It also stitches your own point shorts as latent buyers directly into the machinery. In this lens, disbelief is inventory. Inventory becomes bids. The instant pride hits its limit. Your line about shorts cutting because they declared too high is the skeleton key. Declare too high. And you also declared where the next slab of demand is hiding in plain sight. Time gets reintroduced as pressure's amplifier. Instead of a timeless graph, there is a rhythm. Thin hours create wider air pockets. Thick hours smear moves across deeper books. Your content reads like it was carved on a stone tablet. The tape behaves like a siren. Pressure respects regime. That is why a small wave of aggression during a thin window can do more damage than a larger wave during a thick one. The escape route is not some mystical hack. It is simply refusing to pretend that a single demand line can cover every regime, while admitting, like you already did, that stop bands exist, and they do not blow simultaneously. The split between passive and active stops being academic once you translate your own words. Passive offers that absorb are supply and practice. Passive offers that flee are not supply. They are scenery. Active selling that slams bids is supply and practice. Active selling that never crosses is just opinion. The original content wanted to keep both worlds, the polite one and the painful one, under the same umbrella. The umbrella leaks. A pressure map asks one question over and over: where is the forced action pointing? And what happens to your label too high when that force aims upward, and that glittery phrase too high finally loses its halo? In pressure terms, too high is a crowd slogan that synchronizes exits. Synchronized exits are synchronized entries for the other side. The punchline writes itself, and you already wrote half of it. Shorts get cut. Those cuts are buys. Those buys are demand. That demand completes the climb that the curve insisted should not happen. The alternative perspective is not kinder. It is crueler and therefore clearer. Think in terms of pressure, and the sentence you started with stops being an observation and starts being an instrument. It stops explaining after the fact and starts mapping before the move. Disbelief is inventory. Inventory is latent demand. Latent demand is not a maybe. It is a cued event once heat reaches the band. There is also the part everyone hates to face. If price is a balance between voluntary aggression and involuntary capitulation, then half of what you used to call value is just the absence of panic until it returns. That takes the shine off the graph and puts it on pain thresholds. Not as a slogan. As plumbing, where are they stacked? How close is the next shelf? And what does the book do when it is poked absorb? Back away? Or vanish? Your content nodded toward that by naming shortcuts, then retreated to the myth that supply increases when sellers say so. Sellers increase supply when they actually sell. When they do not, disbelief accumulates into a future bid. That is your own logic sharpened against you. And it is the only version that will not get you wrecked on a pump and dump while you recite doctrine. So the escape route is not magical. It is just this: translate every pretty idea in your text into pressure, execution, and inventory. When demand increases, the translation asks who crossed, who flinched, and who will be forced next. When supply increases, The translation asks whether anything actually filled, or whether the wall was a mirage that minted new shorts and their future buys. Your line about shorts puking is the hinge. Keep the hinge. Toss the chalk. And, if you let that translation stick, what does it do to the identity built on calling tops? Does the persona survive the admission that each too high you love is a breadcrumb trail to your own liquidation? You turned the lens the right way in one line, then tried to turn it back to polite theory. Let us weld it in place. The version that survives contact is simple and cruel. Price climbs when real buyers act, and when shorts who labeled price too high convert their pride into bids. That is your sentence. Stripped of perfume. Everything else is props. Supply and demand are still there if you need the words. But the only definitions that do any work are these. Demand is executed, aggression plus forced covering. Supply is real, absorption, plus active selling that actually hits the bid. When you talk like that, your own content stops being a slogan and starts being a map. Crowd buying sets the stage. Stop bands, write the script. Time and liquidity decide whether the scene plays as a grind or a rip. No mysticism, no ceremony, just plumbing. Harmonizing the whole thing does not mean forgiving the curve sketch. It means translating it without lying. Demand increased only carries weight if it means buyers crossed the spread through layers that did not absorb and shorts surrendered in steps. Supply increased only matters if offers stood and filled and stayed, or if supposed supply flashed and fled and turned into bait that minted fresh disbelief. Your line about shorts getting cut is the hinge. When disbelief clusters, it does not just add opinion. It manufactures cued demand. The same crowd that labels a move too high lays down synchronized exits. The tape hears that chant like a dinner bell. You wanted a neutral market. You got a reflex engine where denial becomes fuel. The reconciliation also kills the alibi that too high equals analysis. In this unified picture is that too high is a radius around your ego, not a truth about price. The radius is tradable because crowds share it. Shared radius. Shared stops. Shared stops. Shared bids. Shared bids. Vertical prints that your chalkboard swore should cool off. No worries. The chalkboard will write a paragraph about overextension while the ladder eats another tier, and your P&L learns another ugly word for elasticity. You can keep the vocabulary if it calms you. The market keeps the receipts either way. There is a final piece you kept dodging, and it is the one that makes the rest usable without preaching. If half of a run is often capitulation, then half of your job is reading where capitulation stacks. Not predicting the mood, not blessing a level with a curve, just admitting that the structure you described crowd buys plus shortcuts creates visible pressure points. Refuse the fairy tale that supply grows when sellers speak it into being. In this synthesis, supply grows when someone actually sells into the teeth of aggression and refuses to flinch. Demand grows when aggression crosses, and when the too high choir finally hands the book a stack of market buys. The moment you translate like that, the content you started with stops contradicting itself. It becomes a single instrument. Pressure names the flow. Inventory names the detonators. The tape prints the confession. So you end up here, lighter and sharper. The graph is not the enemy. The graph is the children's book. The tape is the manual that does not care how you feel about it. Your original claim wanted to be science and accidentally described pain. Good. Keep the pain. It is the only honest metric. Price is not a debate club. Price is a reaction to who acts and who is forced. You can call it demand and supply and keep the chalk clean. Or you can call it pressure and surrender and keep your balance alive. You already chose when you wrote that shorts feed Rallies. Own the choice. Either you cut your losses hard, Or the latter does it with interest and a sarcastic grin. Either you respect executed aggression, or you get wrecked on the next pump and dump while rehearsing why the curve said it could not happen. Keep the chalk if it helps you sleep. The tape will keep the receipt. If this hit home, share it with your buddies. Subscribe to Mind Over Markets so you do not miss these razor-sharp breakdowns that keep the chalk honest and the account awake.